the Big Data Show on QLTV, where we hope to provide you with data that you can use to better inform your wagering decisions. And thank you again for joining me this evening. We will be previewing tomorrow's play-in game between the Portland Trail Blazers and the Memphis Grizzlies, as well as the playoff games that commence on Monday. Before we get started, I want you to be aware of the 20% deal off all BetQL subscriptions if you type in a promo code of Chan. A BetQL subscription will give you access to the BetQL model. It will also give you information pertaining to how the professionals, how the sharps are betting, how the public's betting, and it will also give you any recommendations that the model has, and will provide you with a star rating as to how strong the model feels about a spread, first half spread, a total, a money line, et cetera, et cetera. There are different subscriptions available that you can choose based off how much you're willing to spend on your sports betting, but you can get 20% off any BetQL subscription if you use the promo code of Chan, which is my last name. So right now we are in the NBA playoffs. Essentially, the final regular season game between the Rockets and the Sixers is wrapping up, and one of the most difficult things about the NBA right now is how to evaluate how should we treat the pre-bubble data. That is data that took place over the course of 60 or so games before the season was abruptly suspended in March. Is that data still relevant? Or is the data from the bubble more relevant, even though the sample size is incredibly, incredibly tiny, and many of the teams just had nothing to play for? I think that the best way to deal with the two different sets of data is to try to synthesize the pre-bubble data with the data from Orlando. For example, if a team struggled shooting three-pointers before Orlando and still struggled in their 8 seeding games, then it's fair to infer that they're going to struggle in the playoffs as well. It's only when a team played in an entirely different fashion than how they played before the bubble, that's when things get interesting. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So the first game that we have is the Blazers and Grizzlies game at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning, or it's tomorrow morning my time, but tomorrow afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. The Blazers are 6-point favorites, and the over-under for the game is 232.5. This will be the first play in the game, but it's important to remember that if the Blazers win this game, they advance to the playoffs to where they'll face the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round. The Memphis Grizzlies have to win tomorrow and have to win another game on Sunday, whereas the Blazers only have to win one game tomorrow to advance to the playoffs. The Grizzlies have to win back-to-back games on back-to-back days. And I would just say right now that this game is an incredibly difficult one to handicap. I would imagine that the public is going to be heavily on the Blazers in this game, but this game is challenging from an ATS perspective because the Blazers don't tend to win by much when they win, and the Grizzlies on the other hand tend to lose by a lot when they lose. I mean, the Blazers are 6-2 in the bubble thus far, and their average differential from all 8 games is plus 2.6 points, and they were only plus 5 in wins. 6 of their 8 games pretty much came down to the last minute. The Grizzlies, on the other hand, were 2-6 in the bubble. They actually had a positive net differential by the end. It was plus 0.25, but that is a little misleading because in their losses, the Grizzlies' net differential was actually minus 0.825. Their 2 wins, they were able to win those games by hefty margins, which skews their overall net differential. The Grizzlies and Blazers split their 2 games against each other, with one of the games being an overtime victory in the bubble. Portland defeated Memphis in both teams' first game in the bubble on July 30th or 31st. One thing to keep in mind in this game is that the average final total for the Blazers in the bubble has been a remarkable 249.3 points. Everybody has shot well against Portland in the bubble. Opponents have hit 49.4% from the field and a remarkable 43.3% from the three-point line. The Blazers gave up 15.9 three-point field goals per game. But the question, even with those numbers, the question is whether Memphis has the personnel and the firepower to exploit Portland's porous defense, especially with Jaren Jackson being unable to play. The Grizzlies have only averaged 11 three-point field goals per game in the bubble, and they've only shot 31% from three, which is extreme departure from how most teams have shot in the bubble. Both Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks have shot under 30% from the three-point line in the bubble. Brooks did get back on track a little bit in his last game against the Bucks. He scored 31 points and shot very well from the field. So I would expect that there will be some scoring in this game, but unlike other teams where you can pretty much just bank on a Portland over cash over here, the Memphis is the one team I would be hesitant a little bit on in terms of trusting them to score enough for an over to cash. Another potential bet that you might want to consider is there's been a great disparity in performance between the Blazers in the first half and the Blazers in the second half of games. The Blazers' net differential in first halves during the bubble was plus 4.5. The Blazers actually won 6 of the 8. They outscored their opponents in the first half in 7 of their 8 games, actually. But they were outscored in the second half in 6 of their 8 bubble games. They were minus 1.8 in second halves. So if the line is Blazers minus 6, the first half line is going to be around 3 to 3.5 in most books. So given Portland's performance in the first half compared to their second half performances, perhaps the safest ATS bet you can make in this game is Blazers in the first half. So that is tomorrow afternoon's game. It's a play-in tournament. It's not the playoffs yet. It's the play-in game. If Portland prevails, Portland would advance to a first-round matchup with the Los Angeles Lakers. If the Grizzlies win, there will be a game on Sunday that will then determine whether or not there will be a game between the Grizzlies and the Blazers that will determine which team will advance to face the Lakers in the first round. The first game on Monday, the first playoff game on Monday will be the Nuggets and the Jazz at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This will be on August 17th. The over-under in this game for most books, for the lines that BetQL has right now, from a majority of the sports books, is 220.5. So in this matchup, the Nuggets have defeated the Jazz in all 3 games they've played this season, including 1 game in the bubble. But in all 3 of the Nuggets' victories over the Jazz, they've come all 3 victories totaled the total victory margin from all 3 games is 11 points, including a double overtime victory in the bubble about a week ago. So even though the Denver has pretty much dominated Utah this season in terms of wins versus losses, all 3 games have been close. And in all 3 games, Utah had double-digit leads, but Denver managed to come back each time to win all of their games against the Jazz. Denver has had a miserable time in the bubble playing any defense. Denver's defensive rating of 121.7 was the worst of all teams that were invited to play in Orlando. And their numbers are pretty similar to Portland's in terms of how well opponents have shot against them. The Nuggets opponents shot 49.4% from the field against them. The Nuggets opponents shot 44.8% from the three-point line against them. I mean, Denver was a middle-of-the-pack defensive team during the season. Their overall defensive rating was 110.4. So you can just see how much they slipped in Orlando compared to their performance before they arrived in the bubble. I think one issue that Denver's running into is that Will Barton and Gary Harris have not played a minute in the bubble, and it's quite possible that neither player will suit up for the Nuggets once the playoffs start on Monday. Barton and Harris are two of their four leading players in terms of average minutes per game, so they are key parts of the rotation. But Harris in particular, even though he has not shot well this season, he's actually the only non-center in Denver's normal rotation with a positive defensive plus minus. Denver's guards and small forwards have negative defensive plus minuses. As great as Michael Porter Jr. has played, he hasn't gotten the job done yet on the defensive end, and that's why the Nuggets have struggled so badly. Harris's absence is one contributing factor as to why Denver has struggled so much on the defensive end compared to their regular season performance. So we should have an interesting series with Denver and Utah, even though Denver is 3-0 against Utah this season. All three of the previous games were close, and they were close enough to where Utah could have easily been the team 3-0 against Denver headed into this series. So in case you missed the introduction, I do want to let you know about the promo code that you can use to get 20% off all BetQL subscriptions. Just type in the promo code CHAN, and you will get 20% off whatever subscription model you choose, whether it's a weekly subscription, whether it's a year-long subscription. And it's not just for basketball either. You get it for all sports, for baseball, hockey, the upcoming NFL season, hopefully the upcoming college football season, whatever we get from it. So it is certainly, the subscription will pay for itself, given all the information that you receive. But of course, only subscribe based off of what you're comfortable with in terms of how much you want to spend on sports betting. But I do want to let you know that you can get 20% off any BetQL subscription by using the promo code CHAN. And if you want to, this is a YouTube stream, and this is the second time I've ever done a YouTube live video stream. And if you want to chat or you have a question, I'll take that at the end after we get through these previews. And the third game that I want to preview today is the next game, which is the Raptors Nets game at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right after the Nuggets Jazz. The over-under is 224. The Raptors are heavy favorites. They are heavy favorites. They are 10-point favorites across an average of all sports books. And this series, I think, is going to be a lot more interesting than people think. And on paper, it's a complete mismatch. The Raptors are the defending NBA champions. They have the second best record in the NBA. Not that records matter, because home court is no longer relevant, given all the games are occurring without fans in the stands. But I think the question that needs to be seriously considered is, who's the best player in the series? I mean, I think arguably the Nets have the best player in this series. And you're probably wondering, how can that be the case? Kyrie Irving's gone. He's injured. Kevin Durant never played a game this season. Spencer Dinwiddie decided not to join the bubble. But given the way how Caris LeVert has played, I think a strong argument can be made that he's at least the best offensive player in the series. And offense is what's usually going to decide a playoff series. LeVert has averaged 25 points in the bubble, and he has been spectacular for the Nets. He's averaged 25 points per game on 48% shooting from the field and 6.7 assists. The Nets are 12-9 this season with a plus 3.9 point differential when LeVert receives 30 minutes a game. So when LeVert has gotten playing time, the Nets have not only won games, but they've also won games sometimes convincingly. LeVert's playing time did increase as the season went along, but the Nets are 12-9 straight up this season when LeVert has received over 30 minutes a game. Now, the Raptors did beat the Nets 3 of 4 times this season. None of the games occurred in the bubble. And in the two of the games were relatively easy Raptors wins. They took place in December and January, where the Raptors won by 8 and 19 points respectively. LeVert didn't play one of those games, and in the other game, he played fewer than 15 minutes 15 minutes. LeVert was still a bench player for the Nets at that time. Then the Nets and Raptors had 2 more games in February when Toronto only won by a point and when Brooklyn won by 10. LeVert was receiving starter minutes at that point, and he was averaging over 30 minutes per game. And that's when the Nets season arguably turned around. I mean, the Raptors are obviously a very, very good team. However, there may be more trouble under the hood than people realize. They did go 7-1 in the bubble, but when you dig a lot deeper, there are some issues that their superior record kind of masks. I mean, their offensive rating of 106.9 in the bubble was the 4th worst of any team invited to Orlando. They averaged the 2nd most turnovers per game of all the teams who were playing. And I think the most worrisome thing for Raptors fans has to be Pascal Siakam's regression throughout the course of the season. It's real. And arguably, maybe teams have figured him out. I mean, the first 27 games of the season, this is a time period from October to a time in December. Siakam missed 11 games after the first 27 games of the season. So in the first 27 games of the season, Siakam averaged 25.1 points per game. He shot 39.2% from 3, and he averaged 8 rebounds per game. Then Siakam was inactive for 11 games. He was he was dealing with an injury, and in the next set of games, in the 26 games following his return from missing the 11 games, this time period would have been from January to the season suspension in March. Siakam's averages fell to 22.2 points per game. He shot only 32.2% from three, and his rebounding average fell to 7. So you started to see some regression after he came back, but you can just attribute that to recovering from injury and et cetera, et cetera. But his numbers fell further in the bubble. In fact, Siakam was probably one of the more disappointing Raptor players in the bubble. In Orlando, he averaged 16.9 points per game with just 5.7 rebounds per game. His shooting from the field, not from the 3-point line, but his overall shooting from the field fell to 39.2%. So Siakam has absolutely gotten worse as the season has gone on, and this includes the time when he came back from his 11-game absence, and including the time where he came back to the bubble. So with the Nets arguably having the best player in the series, I think this series is going to be a lot closer than people realize. A lot of people are just writing off the Nets and thinking this is going to be a Raptor sweep. Well, if anything, I don't think it's going to be particularly easy for the Raptors to cover the relatively large spread on Monday. The next game is the Celtics and 76ers at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. The over/under is 220.5, and this will be the third time that this will be the 4th time that the teams will meet this season. None of the games occurred in the bubble. They all occurred before the season restarted. The 76ers did win 3 to 4 games that the teams have played this season, but Ben Simmons played in all 4 games against Boston. Ben Simmons will not be returning for the playoffs for Philadelphia. Simmons averaged, in the 4 games against Boston, Simmons averaged 18.3 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, and 5.8 assists. And he impressively shot 60.8% from the field in the 4 games against Boston. Now, of course, he didn't attempt 1 3-pointer, which is par for the cards for Simmons' career. Now, so I think what we're going to have to evaluate is one thing to look at in handicapping the series is to evaluate how did the Sixers do with just Embiid and no Simmons. So in this season, in the 6 games where Embiid played more than 25 minutes and that Simmons did not play in at all, Embiid averaged 29.6 points per game, 13.5 rebounds, and shot over 51% from the field. The Sixers were 5-1 in these 6 games, but an interesting thing from all of these games is that the final total only exceeded 220 once. And in the 4 prior games against the Celtics, the final total score only exceeded 220 once. So in terms of the 76ers with Embiid, without Simmons, they've generally been on the lower scoring side, and the Celtics and the 76ers have also been a series that's been on the low scoring side. That doesn't mean that this series will also be equally low scoring or that the total was guaranteed to hit in this case. It's just another data point that you can use to help you make a judgment as to how you want to bet the over-under, or if you want to bet the over-under for Monday's game. The final playoff game that we'll be looking at is the final Monday night game, which is the Clippers and the Mavericks. That game will tip off at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Clippers are 6.5-point favorites. The over-under in this game is 231. There's not much to be said about the Clippers and the Mavericks, but the Clippers, other than the Clippers have absolutely dominated the Mavericks this season. The Clippers have defeated the Mavericks in all three contests, including one game in the bubble, and two of the games were not close. The average differential from the three games is 11. Two of the games were 15-point victories by the Clippers, with one of the victories being a 3-point victory. And in the one game that the Mavericks were close, Paul George didn't play. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are an incredibly tough matchup for anyone, but they've been a brutal matchup for the Dallas Mavericks. Kawhi Leonard has averaged 31 points against the Mavericks this season, while Paul George has averaged 25. Much like the Nuggets and the Blazers, the Mavericks have just not been able to stop anybody in the bubble. Their defensive rating is 120.6 in the bubble. That's the second worst of all the teams invited to play in Orlando. They're giving up 126.8 points per game. Opponents are shooting 48.5% from the field and 39.6% from the three-point line. It's just the Mavericks will be facing a team that's been red hot from the field this entire bubble season. It's just a really bad matchup for them, as the Clippers are scorching the Nets on offense. The Clippers' offensive rating in Orlando was 119.3. That's the third best in the bubble, and that's before tonight's game. I know that their rating probably is going to decrease after their game with Oklahoma City, as they sat pretty much all their rotation players. But before tonight's games, LA had hit 48.9% of their field goals and 42% of their three-pointers. LA's bench unit managed to outplay Damian Lillard and Portland's high-powered offense last week. So this is a Clippers team that has been able to dominate offensively without Montrezl Harrell, without Lou Williams for a couple games. Kawhi hasn't played every game. Paul George hasn't played every game. So this series might be a bigger mismatch than people envision. I know that there's Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis also played in all three of the prior meetings between the Clippers and Mavericks. So the previous mismatches we saw were not solely the result of Dallas missing a key player. So I would envision this series being a relatively short one. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you again of a discount for you that you can take advantage of. If you want to sign up for a BetQL subscription, you can get 20% off any BetQL subscription if you type in the promo code Chan. That's my last name. The BetQL subscription will get you access to the BetQL model, as well as you also get information regarding game simulations. For example, there will be information provided to you about the results from, let's say, 60,000 simulations of the Blazers-Grizzlies game. So it will give you an average score through 60,000 simulations, and you can use that to make a judgment as to whether you want to bet the Blazers, want to bet the Grizzlies, want to bet the over-under. So the simulations are another thing that you'll get any access to with a BetQL subscription, and you can get 20% off if you want to go sign up for a subscription. But that's what we have tonight on the Big Data Show. We'll be back next week once the playoffs will have started. We'll be going over the next we'll be going over the games that have yet to be that are going to be starting the next day. So until then, you can reach me at my Twitter handle of Ian Lazarin, and we will see you next time on the Big Data Show. Thank you for joining us this evening, and stay safe and enjoy the play-in game tomorrow. And I hope you win your bets. Thank you for your time this evening. Stay safe.